Tattoos, How the Whale Became and Other Stories. How the Bee Became. Now in the middle of the earth lived a demon. This demon spent all his time groping about in the dark tunnels, searching for precious metals and gems. He was hunchbacked and knobbly armed, his ears draped over his shoulders like a wrinkly cloak. These kept him safe from the bits of rock that were always falling from the ceilings of the caves. He had only one eye, which was a fire. To keep this fire alive, he had to feed it with gold and silver. Over his eye, he cooked his supper every night. It was hard to say what he ate, all kinds of fungus that grew in the airless dark on the rocks. His drink was mostly tar and oil, which he loved. There was no end of tar and oil in the middle of the earth. He rarely came up to the light. Once, when he did, he saw the creatures that God was making. "What's this?" he cried, when a grasshopper landed on his clawed, horny foot. Then he saw a lion, then cobra, then far above him, eagle. "My word," he said, and hurried back down into his dark caves to think about what he had seen. He was jealous of the beautiful things that God was making. "I will make something," he said at last, "which will be far more beautiful than any of God's creatures." But he had no idea how to set about it. So one day he crept up to God's workshop and watched God at work. He peeped from behind the door. He saw him model the clay, bake it in the sun's fire, and then breathe life into it. So that was it. Away he dived back down into the centre of the earth. At the centre of the earth, it was too hot for clay. Everything was already baked hard. He set about trying to make his own clay. First, he ground up stones between his palms. That was powder, but how to make it clay? He needed water, and there in the centre of the earth, it was too hot for water. He searched and he searched, but there was none. At last, he sat down. He felt so sad, he began to cry. Big tears rolled down his nose. "If only I had water," he sobbed. "This clay could become a real living creature. Why do I have to live where there's no water?" He looked at the powder in his palm and began to cry afresh. As he looked and wept and looked and wept, a tear fell off the end of his nose, straight into the powder. But it was too late. A demon's tears are no ordinary tears. There was a red flash, a fizz, a bubbling, and where the powder had been was nothing but a dark stain on his palm. He felt like weeping again. Now he had water, but no powder. "So much for stone powder," he said. "I need something stronger." Then quickly, before his tears dried, he ground some of the precious metal that he used to feed the fire of his eye. As soon as it was powder, he wetted it with a tear off his cheek. But it was no better than the stone powder had been. There was a flash, a fizz, a bubbling, and nothing. "Well," he said, "what now?" At last he thought of it. He would make a powder of precious gems. It was hard work grinding these, but at last he had finished. Now for a tear. But he was too excited to cry. He struggled to bring up a single tear. It was no good. His eye was as dry as an oven. He struggled and he struggled. Nothing. All at once he sat down and burst into tears. "It's no good," he cried. "I can't cry." And then he felt his tears wet on his cheeks. I'm crying," he cried joyfully. "Quick, quick." And he splashed a tear onto the powder of the precious gems. The result was perfect. He had made a tiny piece of beautiful clay. Only tiny, because his tears had been few, but it was big enough. Now, he said, what kind of creature shall I make? The jewel clay was very hard to work into shape. It was tough as red-hot iron. So he laid the clay on his anvil and began to beat it into shape with his great hammer. He beat and beat and beat that clay for 1,000 years, and at last it was shaped. Now it needed baking. Very carefully, because the thing he had made was so very frail, he put it into the fire of his eye to bake. Then, beside a great heap of small pieces of gold and silver, for another 1,000 years he sat, feeding the fire of his eye with precious metal. All this time, in the depths of his eye growed his little creature, baking slowly. At last it was baked. Now came the real problem. How was he going to breathe life into it? He puffed and he blew, but it was no good. It's so beautiful, he cried. I must give it life. It certainly was beautiful. All the precious gems of which it was made mingled their colours, and from the flames in which it had been baked, it had taken a dark fire. It gleamed and flashed red, blue, orange, green, purple, no bigger than your fingernail, but it had no life. There was only one thing to do. He must go to God and ask him to breathe life into it. When God saw the demon, he was amazed. He had no idea that such a creature existed. Who are you? He asked. Where have you come from? The demon hung his head. Now, he thought, I will use a trick. I am a jewelsmith, he said humbly, and I live in the centre of the earth. I have brought you a present to show my respect for you. He showed God the little creature that he had made. God was amazed again. How beautiful, he kept saying, as he turned it over and over in his hand. How beautiful. What a wonderfully clever smith you are. Ah, said the demon, but not as clever as you. I could never breathe life into it. If you had made it, it would be alive. As it is beautiful, but dead. God was flattered. That's soon altered, he said. He raised the demon's gift to his lips and breathed life into it. Then he held it out. It crawled onto the end of his finger. Buzz, it went. Buzz. And whirred its thin, beautiful wings. Like a flash, the demon snatched it from God's fingertip and plunged back down into the centre of the earth.